You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik.
Well, hi, Josh. Good morning. How are things going for you in Senegal, West Africa today?
Excellent. It is hot today, but today is kind of a day off. This is a special holiday in Senegal called Magal Touba, and it's unique to Senegal. About 2 million people are descending on one town, the holy city of Touba, and they have special prayer times. Mouridism is a branch of Islam within Senegal, and it's unique to Senegal. In fact, if you really dig deep into some of their beliefs and practices, they elevate, in some sense, those who follow what's called Mouridism. They almost elevate their Senegalese prophet, although they wouldn't say this directly, but they almost elevate their practice and their prophet above Islam and above their prophet Muhammad. But so about 2 million people have descended on this town. It's about 3.5 hours, 4 hours from where we live. Our town is almost like a ghost town. A lot of people have left for that. They have, like I said, special prayer times. They line the streets with food. They spend millions of dollars on this event. It's going to be all weekend. And it's part of the reason last week we were supposed to finalize paperwork for land we're purchasing, but all the big government officials that we need to verify everything, they've gone to Touba already, so they're taking a week or two off. So it's we have to wait till they get back. But other than that, things are going great here. We're just trying to stay cool. How about there in Dominican Republic? How are you and your family doing?
We must be on the same weather pattern because it's very hot here, and that's good for me losing weight. I've been sweating a lot lately, but we have a real big youth rally this weekend. We have many churches from out of town coming, so we've been doing a lot of prep work for that. So be in prayer for that. We've got a couple preachers going to be preaching the gospel, preaching messages to edify young teenagers. We're hoping to have over 100 teenagers there this weekend. So anyway, just working hard in ministry. And today some topics are more difficult. Some are more about stress. Some are about trials. This one's kind of a fun one today. Ryan Hayden, friend of the show, Ryan Hayden, Pastor Ryan Hayden, who pastors Bible Baptist Church in Mattoon, Illinois, recently started a blog, and a couple of his first blogs were about missions and missionaries. And we know Brother Hayden is someone who loves missions and missionaries, and that comes out in his articles. But he has a really interesting and I think thought-provoking article that Josh and I want to review. It's about missionary presentations, and we might say it comes from a different angle. Now, he's actually written a few posts about this, but we're going to concentrate on the very first one, and I think the title is basically against missionary videos, and kind of very thought-provoking idea. So, Josh, why don't you jump off today here and start us off and explain maybe a little background to this, and maybe we'll get us started in on this article.
Well, this is social media 101 right there. When you start a new blog, you want to get a title out there that's going to catch your attention and get people talking. And this sure does, against missionary videos. What is that all about, right? And so you dive in, and I was privileged. Exactly. Anytime you see anything like that, it piques your interest. And so we look through it. And look, I have to say that there's a lot I agree with. And I do think he did do a follow-up article. We'll go through this one to clarify some things. But I was privileged to be able to interview Ryan a while back. He's got this technology company he does on the side, as well as being a pastor. And I'm excited about that avenue and how the Lord is using him in that way. But so when I saw this, I thought, all right, I saw he posted it on Twitter, and he was kind of giving a little bit of an analysis and kind of wetting your whistle for what it would be about. And he dives right in, letting you know right away, look, I'm not against technology, and I'm not a Luddite and all of that. I own a technology business and all of that. And obviously, right. So what is this point? And here's how I would summarize maybe the point I took away. He just does it he gets more deeper into it than the way, for example, Tom Arnold, who was the media director for BIMI, I think he still might be, or if he's not, he's retired. He's still involved, I think. Don Arnold. Yeah. Actor. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. Well, Tom Arnold, whoever that guy is, doing it. So Don Arnold, he came in when they were talking about doing missionary presentations, and he did all the videos for BIMI, and he came into our candidate school, and he basically said, do you know how to hold a camera steady and at least take a video? If not, don't even try. Forget it. Just do pictures, right? So that was his way of just saying, if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. And that's kind of what's being said in this post. And I have to say, I kind of agree. Now, you, Erik, you just did a missionary video. You had some guy just kind of throw it together. And
yeah,
man,
and honestly, going with what Ryan's saying, I can see that there's some aspects that we're going to add in with the guy I had to deal with this last time, because he really just we wanted to throw the kitchen sink and everything, and so you really do sometimes have to rein people in, because they want to use known demand. No, that's a joke.
It's
all right. So let's jump into it. This article. I love the first phrase here. He says, this is to get you to read the rest of the article. He says, I despise missionary videos and think missionaries should go back to the simple photo slides. I mean, that's a good hook, isn't it, Josh?
Sure. That, you got to catch you right away. And it kind of summarizes what he's talking about. Why does he despise them right away? You're thinking, okay. And I'll be honest with you. I've sat through some missionary videos where it's kind of like you get the same feeling. It's, man, if you don't, and I think this is what Ryan's trying to get across in his article. If you don't know what you're doing, then just don't do it. Don't worry about it. Simple is better. And I'll be honest with you, the way technology kind of works, you watch trends come and go, and it always comes back to what is more simple. What's the simple way of doing things? It's kind of like fashion. Fashion comes and goes, and it comes in stages. And what used to be out of style 10 years ago, that was in style 20 years ago, is now back in style. So technology kind of works that way. You find some new fancy techniques, but you really, all you need if you're a missionary is just learn the fundamentals and don't try to get too fancy and keep it as simple as possible. But yeah, it's definitely catches your eye when you read that. I despise missionary videos. What about, have you had that experience where, okay, it's one of two things. You're watching somebody else's missionary video and you're either like, oh man, I got to follow up on this. This is my video's next. It's nowhere near this quality. Or you're thinking, oh, this poor guy, he needs help, right? It's one of the two.
Well, it's funny because of my background. When I younger, I really was into film. Like I said, I interned as a documentarian. I've always loved that. And then when we started making our missionary presentations, I tried to involve people who could do the things I wanted to do, but couldn't do by myself. So when we would go to see a missionary presentation, like as you mentioned, someone ahead of us who might have had a really, really great presentation, it was always encouraging. I think the key maybe element that's not mentioned in this article exactly, or it doesn't stick out to me, which is really your video presentation, your presentation with your words on your presentation, your presentation behind you at your table, your prayer cards, everything really kind of needs to have a point. I think what's happened is there's a lot of videos that get made, and like you say, he says in the article too, like you can tell someone just tried to throw in a lot of things, but it's not really telling the story, and it's not connecting with who this person is, what they're going to do, or what they're doing. And I think that's kind of maybe the point of this, and why someone like Ryan, who has a keen eye, like my wife, there are things she'll see about decorating that maybe someone has really kind of hodgepodged it, and it bothers her more than just having a plain wall, because she has a keen eye for that. I think that's probably the same way with Ryan. He's so technologically savvy that to see it done really poorly and just kind of like, hey, I'm going to do a missionary video like Saving Private Ryan, that it just kind of messes with your mind.
No, I agree. I think the more geeky or nerdy you are in whatever field you're into, right, the more analytical you are and the more you break down those different things. And it's true in any field, right, that you're in. You look at somebody's work, you're a plumber, and you look at somebody who's not a plumber trying to do the work of a plumber, and you're like, that doesn't look too good, or, and so you're always going to analyze and be more critical of an area that you have an expertise in. But I agree, missionaries need to find, if you're going all out in a video, and he's going to read, he first touches on why they're popular and why missionary videos can be profitable. But I would say, if you're a missionary, we'll get to that. Like, you got to know why you're doing it. What's your reason behind it? What's the pros and cons to just showing pictures as opposed to doing video? And for me, and let's get more into detail after, but for me, a video is all about story, not just about reporting what's going on and visualizing, because you can show what's going on in a picture if you're just giving an update. And I do like this idea of being able to get into details with going through pictures like they used to in the slides. You could talk about details, something might pop in your mind that you weren't thinking of. And with a video, you're stuck with just that one video being used. Whereas if you decide to go a video route, it is all about story. What's the story you're telling? But that's a whole nother issue. Let's continue with, obviously that's a strong statement. I despise missionary videos. I think missionaries should go back to simple photo slides. But then he says, well, let's share why. He says, I understand why missionary videos are so popular. So number one, he says they're easy to share. You can upload them to YouTube. I upload mine to Vimeo, and they can be downloaded by anybody, anywhere. They are always the same length. Okay, that's definitely a pro. Erik, when you make videos, or in the past, of course, we were joking about who you had make your most recent video. I put it together for you, of course. And anyways, we could talk about that in a minute. But usually when I'm doing a video for myself, I'll make about 2 or 3 versions of it. One's going to be a 5-minute version. I'll do another one around 7 to 8-minute version, and then a longer version, depending on what story do I want to tell, how much time do I have in the church, and would I rather have the church visualize through video what's going on here in Senegal, or would I rather just stand up and give an in-person testimony? And again, I think there's pros and cons to both. But again, if you can effectively tell story through video, then by all means go through the video route. But again, usually if you had the opportunity, a pastor said either show your video or get up and give a personal testimony, you got one of the two choices. What would you rather go with for sharing with the church what's going on?
Well, I think that depends on every missionary. For instance, I was watching a missionary conference online this past week, and I felt really bad for this young man, sharp guy. He had a real decent video that explained well the country he was going to. And I do believe after listening to his testimony, it's obvious he is a very intellectual young man. It sounds like he was a school teacher before. But it was obvious after about the first 5 or 6 minutes, he was not very dynamic. And I know the church he was at. I know the clientele, the church members who were sitting there. And I'm guessing it was very difficult to listen to 5 or 6 minutes, whereas his video was very aesthetically pleasing. And I understand that sometimes those, even in our natural English language, that doesn't mean you're not going to be a good missionary because you can't communicate in 5 minutes in front of a church that's not your home church. The people like Josh tend to be very dynamic, and they can tell long stories, and it's very interesting. Not everyone has that. So for me, I like a story that has forced me over the time to make this video, to compress it, to tell the most important parts, because most people, when they get talking, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit later on, they can one, forget, or two, just get totally off to the side and miss the key part. And a video makes you stay on point, be concise, and tell the most important things. So that's why I like it. And then what I'll do is I adapt, whether I get the time beforehand. Sometimes I'll say, Pastor, play my video, and I'll come up and talk afterwards. Or sometimes I'll introduce the video. So it depends. But I have adapted what I'm going to say specifically to that church, to that congregation, those who may be around. But the video keep the main thing, if you will.
No, that's a great point. And he follows up. There's 2 more points that Ryan makes in this article on why they're popular. He said they can be compelling and professional if they're well done, and they can make a missionary seem like he really has his act together. Now, I'm not sure what where he's coming from with that statement, right? Like everybody has different experiences where somebody seems to have it together, and maybe then you get behind the scenes with them and they're just a mess. Or like you said, it could be somebody who does have their act together, but then when they get up, they don't have, their strength is not public speaking. They're not dynamic, and it can be, it's just a little awkward and uncomfortable even sometimes listening to somebody wherein maybe what they're called to do, their strengths will shine through in the area, in the field that God has called them to. And I would just say this, just thinking about missionary videos, presentations, and how you update your churches, I would also add, just play to your strengths. What is can you tell a story? Can you engage your audience in person? And can you paint a word picture by telling a story? If you're able to keep your audience engaged, then play to that strength if you don't need that video. But again, if you can, like you said, I like what you said, if you can get your story that you want to tell, condense it down to 5 minutes, and you're forced to just point out the main parts, then you've communicated. And you always want to leave a little bit to where at the end of the video or the end of your presentation, everybody senses, man, I want to find out more about what's going on there. I want to get on board. I haven't been paying attention, but man, he's got my attention. I want to see what God is doing there and will continue to do. And so you're not only cultivating your partnership with your churches, but it's kind of a call to, hey, this is what God is doing. It's not about us, but it's about what the Lord's doing. And you're partnering with us in that. And so you're trying to get people excited. So it is about, I know he says here, don't worry about looking professional. I don't think that's not the bother. It's not about looking professional. It's about passionately communicating what God is doing so that others get just as passionate about the work as you are in it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Another thing that, Ryan, I'm sure, has gone and preached to different churches, but as a missionary on deputation or furlough, oftentimes you're running in from, bad traffic, your kid's having a problem, you get in there, you're throwing your thing on a table, and you're putting your prayer cards out, and you're shaking hands, and you've had to run to the bathroom before you get up there. There is sometimes the best thing to calm your heart right before you get up to speak is that they can play your presentation, you refocus, and you're like, okay. But we'll get to this a little later on. But the funniest thing to me is this idea that watching a slideshow would be more appealing in 2022 than anything else. When I've never seen a time in our lives when we're less bored. We're more bored by things than ever, and paying attention. And so I can see that, where I would like to listen to Josh talk about those things for 30 minutes. But I would just say the average person in the church, unfortunately, is not like that. And we'll go on here. The first point, though, is missionary videos are hard. And I think this is the part where we see Ryan's background in technology. To do something correctly, to do something well, do something professional, they're not easy to put together. And Josh and I both know that from experience. I think I especially know how much I like good video presentations and know how difficult they are to do. And I will come up with the concepts and know what I want to put, but I can't do the magic, as you will. And it takes someone with much more skill, whether it be professional or semi-professional, to help you do it very high quality. Now, he mentioned something about here getting a videographer and paying lots of money. I don't recommend that. I don't recommend paying thousands of dollars. I think most people within their sphere, or they can go into a missionary helps organization, can find someone to do it at a very reasonable price that is worth the investment. That's my opinion.
I would agree. I was speaking with Paul Connor. He's a pastor out in Vancouver, British Columbia, and he's big into media. He does an excellent job. He's done missionary videos. He's gone overseas, and we were talking about I was asking him different questions about what are some things he would recommend for missionaries and preparing missionary videos, things like that. And one of the things he mentioned, I thought was a terrific idea, is if you're on the field on a survey trip, ask the missionary, or wherever you're at, find the local university and ask for the media department, and if any of the students would like to do a project of just making some stock footage, for you, and they'll take the university equipment, they'll come out, shoot some. A lot of times he said it's either going to be free or very, very cheap that they'll do it for. And so that's definitely, there's different options out there. Nowadays, technology is not hard to get your hands on to do it decent quality. And there's everything you need to know about using anything is online. But I think to the point Ryan's trying to make is it takes time to perfect any skill that you're developing. It doesn't come natural. I've been working on video editing. I've been doing it for years, since I was a teenager, and I'm still not up to date. I'm still not up to date with all the technology because I don't like all that aspect of filmmaking. I love the story. I love narrative. I love story. And I've always been intrigued with being able to use video to tell a story. But then when it comes down to the technical aspects of actually editing it, putting it together, I'm still learning so much. But again, there's a lot of access. YouTube, I mean, you just look up how to do this and that, learn some basics. I watched a guy the other day, and he explained just how to do some nice transitions. Just like I did one where he showed you how to flip the iPhone and change the zoom setting, and it made this amazing shot that I was able to do. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that you're able to find online. And now one thing I would disagree with, he says in the missionary videos are hard. I would agree with that. They're time consuming. And he says missionary videos are an unnecessary difficulty in the deputation process. Well, to me, big deal. You're on deputation, put the work in, if the Lord's allowed you to have the finances, and like you said, you don't need to spend thousands of dollars, find connections. The Lord will lead you to the right people, but, put together a video and put some hard work into it. Make it, as best you can, best quality you can. And, I think it's possible. It can be done.
I think maybe what Ryan means to say, we know that he did this in a way that was, I think, meant to be provoking, thought-provoking. I think what you probably should have put in this point is basically in bold print, if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. Get someone to help you. Some of my favorite missionary videos were very simple, mostly did have slides, maybe use what we call the Ken Burns effect, which is a photo and you're just moving slightly in or slightly out. Right. That's very provoking and very, moves you to emotion and sentiment. I think the key here, though, is they are hard to do. If you don't know what you're doing, get someone to help you. I think that's kind of the key here.
Absolutely. You find those. That's what being a team is all about. That's what missions is about. It's about partnering and learning how to adapt to things that you don't understand and know. And so, if you're a missionary, again, a lot of times missionaries, we do have the mindset that we don't want to spend a lot of money on something that may not be necessary and that isn't exactly advancing the cause of Christ per se. And in some ways, it isn't a necessity for advancing the cause of Christ. I think it can be a useful medium. It's definitely an effective tool to help cultivate awareness and increase awareness so that people can better pray, so that young people are more aware of what's taking place, so that when God works on their heart, this place of the world might pop up in their mind if they're thinking about missions. I want to put together a video and share story and share narrative that's memorable so that, at the end of the conference, if God's working on somebody's heart, the images of Senegal are popping up in their mind as they're thinking about surrendering to missions. And so I think it can be a useful tool. But a lot of times missionaries, we thought, well, I'm not going to put a lot of money into it. I don't have much time. Let me just throw something together. You're better off just giving a personal testimony. Don't just slap it together. Find somebody who knows what they're doing. If you can't, then like he says in the article, well, then just put together some pictures and share. But you have to, like we mentioned earlier, beware that you don't just ramble on when you're not chained down to the time limit of a video.
We're getting to that point a little later on. This next one this has happened to all of us. this has happened to all of us. If you have a missionary presentation, his sub point is they're hard to play in church. Even the biggest and best churches, I think most people agree the devil is in the sound system all the time, and the visual aids as well. Like, for whatever reason, I mean, you can't even explain it. You've got your video downloaded on YouTube, or you've got it on an archive, and you hand it in a zip drive to someone. And for whatever reason, even the biggest and best churches, they don't work, or the color schemes are off. I mean, that is true. And that's why, once again, if you're basing everything on your ministry, kind of expressing yourself on that video, and it didn't work, you are up the creek without a paddle there. And you literally need to have in your mind, this is what I'm trying to express. Now, I believe this video is a wonderful tool to express it better maybe than me for another 5 minutes. But very often you get to a church and they don't have a projector. I've been to lots of churches. They don't have that stuff, and I don't bring it along anymore like I did 20 years ago or 15 years ago.
Right.
But it's the message you have. That's the key. And I think that's what Ryan really is getting at.
I would agree. And I would say, to his point, he makes a good missionary presentation can make it look like you have it together. But as a missionary, you should have it together, right? And I think you should be aware of the challenges and that comes with using media. That's why when we come, I have whatever video we've done, I have it on at least 2 USB keys in case one fails. And then I have it in several different formats at several different file sizes. And I haven't done this yet, but one thing this article made me think of, which I'll probably think about doing. Now, I always had a backup. I'm always ready with a story or something in case the video fails, to either fill the time until they get the video running or to just use that time. So never just stand there with dead space being like, I hope this comes back on. Oh, right. Do something to fill that void and not make it awkward. But then as well, and I think I'll do this on our next trip back to the States, I think I'm going to do both a video and then have a photo backup if the video is not compatible. And I usually try to do several different formats so that they can transfer. If they're Apple, I want to have the Apple format. If it's Windows or whatever it may be, several different formats to make sure it's compatible. The IT guy can move it over, either that and then have like a photo backup that they can just throw the photos over, and you can just talk through the photos. I think as a missionary, you should be ready for anything. I mean, you live on the foreign mission field. That's your literal life, is just being ready for anything. You never know what's coming around the corner when you're living on the foreign field. And I think the same should be true when you're visiting churches, that you need to be ready for anything, any sort of media blackout or anything that's just not working. Make sure you're ready for that and you got it backed up. So that I totally understand. We've had our share of technical difficulties, and you work with it, you go with it. Try not to make it awkward, and you don't make the church look bad either. Like, oh, come on, you guys can't get this together. It's 2022. You can't get equipment working. So, hey, it is what it is. So, all right. So we move on to number 2, which he writes and says, missionary slides are great. Okay, now, how many people under the age of 30, if you say missionary slides are great, are they going to be like, what is that, like a dance move or something? Like, what? What's a missionary slide? Okay, so do you remember slides growing up?
I do. And I would say, if I were staying next to Ryan, he said, missionary slides are great, I would say, are they really? Are they really? Because I remember being as a kid sitting through a lot of missionary slides, even a young adult, young man. I remember one in particular person, and I guess they just didn't listen to how many minutes this pastor told them they could go, and it was quite long and quite extensive and seemed very repetitive of the photos we were seeing.
Yeah, unfortunately, many of us missionaries work in countries where time is no longer relevant. It's not a relevant issue to the product of it. Productivity and time don't go together. And so in most countries, in fact, what makes a productive use of your time is the cultivating of relationships. And you do that through sharing and talking. And so I think missionaries translate that when they go back to the field that, well, I've got to fit this story in and I need to, well, let me just tell this one more story. And they're so used to having just spent 4 years in a country where you spend hours just sitting down chatting with people. That's just not how it works nowadays. And I understand what he's saying. He says, obviously, I don't want us to go back to using slides, but he likes the modern equivalent. He's a proponent of, let's just go to PowerPoint files with some photos in it, he says, and a missionary can talk it through. So we've already pointed out right away just some of the pros and cons of that, being a missionary can go long-winded. I remember sitting through slides, and again, it's not to say one was more professional than the other, but what do you remember most about the missionary was generally things he brought, like for show and tell, and I'm speaking as a kid, right? And how exciting he was. Did he engage you and make you excited? And that again, that has partially to do with personality, partially that's to do with, communication skills. And so like we said at the opening of this podcast, I think you have to play to your strengths. And if you can make a video that will portray your passion more effectively than losing track and going 20 minutes on one photo, then I'd say go with a video.
And another thing too is I don't disagree that slides are great, because I personally like to have a slideshow and PowerPoint, very simple. He's right about this too. The backgrounds have to be simple. Aesthetically, you don't want just a lot of things confusing your brain. You want these photos to be the key. And so I agree with that as well. And I also agree in certain settings, slideshows are wonderful. For instance, very often I'm given about 25 minutes in a Sunday school class. Well, it's hard to jump in, give an introduction, and to preach any kind of message or teach any kind of message on missions for 25 minutes. You can. It's easy. But I also find that a slideshow where you kind of go through a little more extensively than what you're normally given up from the pulpit. The pulpit, usually the maximum you're going to be given is 15 minutes. It's usually closer to 10 nowadays. And as you're taught as a missionary, you want to be under that time. So we're always fighting not going long-winded. But when you're given a Sunday school class or maybe a youth group, a slide presentation does allow you to go 20, 25 minutes, show certain slides. So I don't think we disagree with Ryan that there's potential in this, but I think the idea that it replaces the video is not something I'm necessarily on board for.
Sure, I agree. And I think maybe if he had a couple missionaries visit his church and they go about 30 minutes over time, then it might change your mind a little bit. But again, we're speaking from experience because we know we're missionaries. And I know personally, if you give me an hour, I'll go an hour, no problem. And so we can ramble on, and go on and on. So I would say, yeah, I definitely would have a video ready, have some pictures ready, have a slideshow ready. Like Erik said, if you're doing a 30-minute Sunday school class, well, you're going to be able to you can help your audience visualize better what it is that you're doing on the field, have a little more fun with it. And whereas with a video, again, like I said earlier, you're telling a story with a video. What's the story you want to tell? Have an opening, a closing. There's no big plots. You're just telling a story of what God is doing on your mission field. Whereas you could get creative with the pictures.
I think the idea of saying that like slides are great are a little bit like the guys nowadays you see if you go to Walmart, different places, they're buying records again. They buy these record players and they're putting records out and they're like, this is awesome, until they realize you got to flip the record, and it's just like, they have their place. There's a nostalgicness to this, and there's probably in Ryan's life and other people, I have very vivid memories of seeing slides and being moved for the first time, understanding what a missionary is. I remember the very first missionary I met who was in Papua New Guinea, and I remember being very affected. So we're not disagreeing with that. But I will say, as I just watched a missionary video the other day, this young man I was explaining earlier, he was going to a country, I won't say the country, but he just had some stock footage of the place he's going to. It had nothing to do with what he was going to do, but you understood he was going to go plant churches, he's going to lead people to the Lord, a tough country. And you saw the beauty of the country, you saw the vastness of the country, and just in a few seconds, there's not one photo, if you just did the still, that could express what we saw in 10 seconds of video. And I think that's the tool. Now, what Ryan gets at is doing it professionally and doing it nicely, not being distracted with the music and just doing it correctly. But I felt like when I saw this video, I thought this is where I would disagree. But just watching 20 seconds of this video, it would be really hard pressed to explain that in 10 photos.
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of leads us to his third point. He said missionaries shouldn't care about looking professional. I agree to that to an extent, depending on what you define as professional. Because to make a professional quality presentation requires a lot of time. And that's time that a lot of missionaries just don't have, because it's not just time putting it together. If you don't know what you're doing, that's hours and hours of learning how to do it. And maybe that's just not your wheelhouse, and that's okay. That's where we made the point earlier. Find somebody who does know what they're doing. Find somebody, every church has an IT guy. Every church has that guy, right? That kid who they know what they're doing. They're gifted with it. They just have that niche and they're able to do it. He says, missionaries, if you're reading this, you are not professionals. You aren't graphic designers. You aren't selling software. You are missionaries. Just be missionaries. And I definitely understand what he's saying. Don't sweat so much, trying to come up with this perfect video, because at the end, it's not going to look that great if that's not your wheelhouse. And so again, keep it as simple as possible. But you could still learn at the same time. Technology is advanced to where, look, I use what's called canva.com. All right. Canva. I am not a graphic designer. I'm not a graphic artist. I don't have an eye for it, but Canva it's all intuitive. It's all they pre-set up your templates. You type in what you're doing, whether it's a YouTube thumbnail for a video you've done, whether it's a graphic, a chart, anything, even stock footage for whatever country you're in or anything, you can find it on this canva.com, and you throw it together, and then you source it to whatever file you need. And that's what I use. I didn't have to learn anything. I just had to learn how to copy what other people are doing that's good and throw it together. So you can learn. It all depends on how much time you want to put into it. But would you agree, Erik, that should a missionary not worry about looking professional? And I think the context is with his media presentation. Should a missionary just be like, it's not a big deal, Is that
well,
what you
I find it funny, and once again, we're saying these things very much tongue in cheek. We love Ryan, and we encourage to talk to him. But I think about that, if Ryan received an email from a person opposed to a letter that had just even the simplest letterhead, which one would you like? Well, an email's fine over a letter that had a nice letterhead. I mean, obviously, there's nothing wrong with having some professionalism to it. Now, I think what Ryan's actually speaking to is this idea of maybe one, and this is something we didn't really speak about, is maybe not even portraying exactly who you are. There's a part of, for a lack of a better term, being plastic and not real. You could be making a video that portrays something that's not necessarily the reality. I think both of us can say that we've seen things like that, videos like that, and maybe Ryan has come across that some too, where he knows the realities opposed to what's being portrayed on a video. And so you have to be very accurate with that. But I think it all comes back to, I think there's nothing wrong with being professional in your presentation. And I'll give you an example, because you were talking about this. We have had all wide spectrums in our video presentations. We've literally paid videographers not nearly the amounts that Ryan's talking about here. We got them far reduced. But to do special projects where we're trying to do a fundraiser, we had videographers come here to the island and make special videos that were of the highest quality, because that was their profession. And we felt we needed to make that investment, and the Lord repaid us and blessed us with that. Then we have people like yourself who are, you probably could do that as a living or right there, and we had a very high quality film. And then there were times when I didn't have professionals, but people who were good at it. And so I made it a very simple story with simple music, simple script, but conveying the idea. And so all three of those times, the tools were greatly used, and we tried to do it be as professional as possible, but understanding that, this is not the nightly news, this is not a Steven Spielberg production, but it is conveying something that is aesthetic to the eye. And as he mentioned early on, they are easy to share. And if you meet a pastor or meet a prospective church, you want to be able to share it with them in a very succinct time that they can watch a 3 to 5 minute video and get a snippet of your heart, because a lot of times they can't give you 20 minutes on the phone. You can't go get coffee with them. And so I do believe that the professionalism is important if it's real and if it sticks to the point of who you are and what you're doing.
Well, I think that's what the bottom line is effective communication, right? I just read an article the other day speaking to church websites, and how this guy had done his own research, and he said most church websites I go to have more information that I don't need and not enough of the information that I am actually looking for, and which can be true. It is hard to communicate through a third party, because the point of mediums of media is you're communicating an idea, you're communicating a thought, you're communicating a story through this third means. You're not just using words to convey, you're taking video and audio and music, and you're putting it all together to tell this story. And so I would say, I agree with Ryan, you don't have to worry about looking professional, but you do need to take very seriously how you communicate. I think missionaries need to put their work in, especially if it's not a skill set that you're natural at. If you're not a natural communicator, maybe you're very effective on the field you're serving in, but when it comes to standing up in front of an American audience, you get a little shy. Sometimes the words don't come out. Well, you can develop that and cultivate that, not to become a carnal, motivational speaker, but just learn to effectively communicate God's vision. I think it's honoring to God. And so that when you learn to effectively communicate, the professionalism, it's going to vary. I've seen missionary videos that they threw together using like an iPhone. Not everything was perfectly executed, but they got across the point and it left an impression because you understood what they were communicating. Whereas you can do a professional video and it falls flat because you're just going through cliche after cliche and you haven't really been able to effectively portray your heart. So that's really one of the things the missionaries have to learn to balance, is that professionalism with just being able to convey your heart. And I think it meets somewhere in the middle with just learning to effectively communicate through whatever medium you have been tasked to communicate with.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because I think, once again, maybe it's not specified in this. Now, we talked about, Brian did kind of a follow-up blog post called Missionary Videos Part 2. And basically what he talks about, how he, instead of reading prayer letters, he sets up times, calls missionaries on Zoom, will record that conversation, and later on edit it down, maybe throwing in some pictures to kind of go along with it. And, he talks about in that article how he talks to them directly, asks questions where he feels like the church would want to hear. Things like, tell us who you are, where you serve, who you're serving with, what does a typical week look like for you, what are your projects,
so it's kind of like,
and how we can...
Kind of like a podcast, like a Missionary Perspective Podcast, almost like
very, very often it sounds a lot like that. But this is the part that kind of made me laugh and smile, is that he does it in video form, records it, edits it, and then plays it for his people instead of reading a prayer letter, because they find that visually attractive, which I think is funny. Because let me give you an example. I think it's kind of funny. What is usually, let me ask you this. What do you think is probably usually the most boring part of a church service anywhere that's not your church service? It's easy. What is it?
It's gonna announcements.
It's the announcements. It's the announcement, 100%. It's the announcements. And so what do new churches do to spice up the announcements? Well, they still
play the video, and They play videos, and then if they're really smart, they play it at the end or during the offertory or offering or something like
Right.
that. But yeah,
So yeah, the placement, so be it. But what do? They record the same
right.
announcement that the pastor would give you, but for whatever reason, you go, "Hey, this video is kind of cool. I'm interested in this video." And so I think when I thought about this article, it made me laugh, which it's hilarious because Ryan basically does the same thing for these. Instead of reading a prayer letter, he has the
Right.
missionary tell you. But why is it more interesting? Well, one, video is more visually aesthetic. Second, it is the heart of the missionary. He's responding to the question. It's not prepackaged, and that's I think what Ryan's really getting at. It's not fabricated, it's real. And that's why I want to encourage with our last video Josh helped me do. One of my favorite things to do in videos and the things I enjoy seeing is almost like a documentary style where the missionary is speaking to the camera, where he is looking like he's being interviewed and he's talking. And that's what Pastor Ari and Pastor Elias did. And we got really great responses because Josh did it very well, but also because the content was, hey, I'm listening to what they're saying. And so I think ultimately that's kind of what Ryan's saying is, let's have the missionary explain in their own words and emotions what the Lord has called them to do.
And that's it. And, he kind of closes it by saying, let missionaries be missionaries, not marketers. And I agree. That's one of the aspects that I never loved about it, but it was a reality of missions that we just don't speak openly about often, is that you're not judged as a person based on how sharp your materials look and how professional it looks. But again, it's just this state of where we are in Western culture, that those things are important. It's kind of like part of the whole package when taking somebody into consideration. They're going to look at a guy. I had a pastor tell me, he said, Josh, he was against missionaries growing facial hair. And he said, Josh, if I had 2 packets and one missionary had facial hair and the other one didn't, I'm taking the guy without facial hair. And I said, well, what if the guy, is this, he's like, I don't care. Like, well, you're judging just based on the cover. He's like, I don't care. That's just me. And we were joking because he supports us, right? So not a big deal. I grow, well, I don't know if you call it a beard, but whatever's coming out of my face there, it's, some sort of facial hair. But so we were having a good laugh about it. But in some sense that there's reality to what he was saying, that pastors are inundated with all these packages every single week. And what is the request? To become a financial partner. So they're going to be looking and considering, all right, what part of the world are you in? What mission board are you with? And then, does your packet look like you've got it together? And even if, and what your packet says and what your presentation says is that even though I may not know how to do this, I can at least find somebody to partner with me that does know how to do it. So that means I can be a team player. Because if you're just out there doing everything on your own, well, that's not really how missions works in the end. And so I think it is important to take a lot of thought and time. Yes, I would hope and trust that pastors aren't viewing you as a salesman coming in trying to sell yourself, and it's not about marketing. But again, on the other end, for the missionary, it's part of the process. You need to put your best into it, understanding that this is for the Lord. It's His work. This is part of the process. And we want to be as effective as we can in communicating the calling and the passion that God's given us. That's my take on it.
Yeah. And I'll add one last thing here. I believe when you see prayer cards and you see a background, you see a video, and when you see they've been thought through and they've been, I won't say professionally done. I think everything's professionally done unless you're doing it by hand because somebody's making it. In that sense, I think what it's showing is that, it's important to you. It's important to you. I mean, none of those guys that have churches are going to, have tracts or signs or anything that they don't feel like it's going to do the best thing to portray that it's something that's important. But we would agree with Ryan 100% in the idea that we've both been in mission conferences where we've seen people who have all those things, but after knowing them for 5 or 10 minutes, you realize there might be some problems here. whatever the situation is, it may not be if they have a true passion or what. And unfortunately, Ryan has probably seen lots of missionaries come through that seem to have it all together, and they got a prayer letter one day that it didn't work out. And so I
Right.
think the heart there is right. And
Right.
I think it'd be fun to have Ryan on and talk about this and to go on a little further. But it was a fun conversation. I am pro missionary video, just by the way.
Definitely. And, no, Ryan, if you're listening to this is coming from a place of love. And we appreciate what you do, helping missionaries. Go back and listen to his interview. And hey, go on and subscribe or follow his blog. I'm going to pull it up here real quick. It is
Pastor Ryan Hayden.
Ryan.com, right? PastorRyanHayden.com.
PastorRyanHayden.com. He got a
And
lot of
he's on Twitter.
of
He's always
pub
sharing
today.
stuff. That's right. So go on there and follow his blog. Let him know you appreciate his articles. A lot of thought-provoking articles there. And check out our interview we did with him earlier. And you'll be interested if you're into technology and all that. And so great. Well, I think this was a great discussion. And again, let's continue to just do the best, do what God's called us to do. And strive to do all for his glory. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might and do it for the glory of the Lord. And whether it's a video, whether it's an old-fashioned slide, hey, you can glorify Jesus. It's our job to, it's our job to get the gospel out.
Oh, that's the wrong one.
Okay, if you're not watching this, we're pretending to go through slides. Okay. Oh, man. Those were the days. There is a lot of nostalgia connected to it.
Hey, it's old record players, man. It's awesome. We all like nostalgia.
That's right. Well, good deal. Well, I appreciate this conversation, Erik, and looking forward to getting back on next week. I hope you have a great week. This is Josh Mead over here in Senegal, West Africa.
And Erik Johnson in the Dominican Republic. Have a great day.